So, again, thank you for being here. Today is probably going to be the biggest, our first step into some hard topics, hard conversation. Because Paul is writing very bluntly and very boldly for Titus and his ministry. So what I want to do is look at just what it says and then have us talk about what the implications are of what Paul was saying to Titus, especially as it goes off today. So we're looking at this idea here. This next section is about Paul giving some standards of leadership and what a quality leader should look like. And it's a list that is reflected in his letter to Timothy. So there are some duplications, but there are also some new things that Paul lists in Titus. So some things we're going to see here is not new, but it is a list that as you go down, you just watch the pool of eligibility go lower and lower and lower and smaller and smaller and smaller until finally it's almost like the only person that can be qualified is Jesus, right? And so we want to look at that and what that means and what that says. I had a friend who was a pastor of a rather large church in Fayetteville. And the church had gone through a big shakeup. Something happened with the previous pastor, and so this new pastor was coming in, and he told me that he was hearing from his people that they were saying, "Man, you should have been here in the glory days. You should have been here when there was we had 900 people coming every Sunday, and it was so good. It was so great." And he would look at them and say, "Was it though? Just because you have a lot of numbers, does that mean it really was great?" Sometimes numbers doesn't always mean quality. And so here Paul is telling Titus, don't look for quantity. You've got a big job ahead of you. There's a lot of churches that are going to need some help, some big time help, but you can't just take anybody. So let's take a look at what Paul says. All right, you guys ready? So we're in Titus chapter 1. This is a quote that I've been using for a while now, a statement. I will talk to the teenagers about this, that we are to be a blessing people, which means that if you look at what God wanted to do with his people, the Israelites and his children, they were to be a nation that would bless because they were so blessed themselves, right? So we're to be a blessing people, not just blessed people. If we're just blessed people and stand around and just go, aren't we blessed? Aren't we good? Aren't we just receiving so much from the God, but we're not blessing anybody else, then something's happening. I'll say the word here, I call it spiritual constipation. Maybe I shouldn't have said it that way, but that's really what it feels like. Because after a while, I begin to see a sickness come through a congregation who's stuck on just receiving blessing from God without sharing the blessing. What happens is that the congregation starts to get sick, and so here's Paul, and he's saying, okay, we got some sick churches, we got some sick congregations. Let's see what we can do to fix it. So, looking at verse 5, you guys ready? I'm going to read from the ESV, so if your version says something majorly different, go ahead and raise your hand, and let's talk about what it says. Here's what it says in the ESV. This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained into order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. Now, we've had a couple questions from last week about, was this like every town, every church in every town? So what we're seeing here in this last part is that it's not every town, it's the major cities in Crete. There's about 4 or 5 of these major cities in Crete. We don't know how many actually, but those major cities in that time, it was probably around 4 or 5. So we're looking at Paul to say, okay, so you're going to go to these churches And these churches are going to be the one that's going to minister to the smaller churches in the region. Kind of like what we do today, right? The big churches help the smaller churches, or shall we say, the big churches ought to help the smaller churches. As I directed you. But here's what I want to point out. He says, so we've already established from our introduction why Paul was giving Titus this job in Crete. He says here, so that you might put what remained into order. This word, remained into order, it's a medical term. And it's a medical term about broken bones. And I'm quite proud of myself. I actually found the quote from Hippocrates in his document about how to fix broken bones. And where he uses this word, so the same Greek word that Paul uses here to, you might put what remained into order. The word actually means to put straight in its natural order, right? So in Hippocrates, he says it this way. In treating fractures and dislocations, the physician must make the extension as straight as possible, for this is the most natural direction. I think that's a great way to look at this. So what Paul is saying to Titus is you're going to be, what your goal is, your job is to take these churches and set them straight into the natural order of how a church operates, or how a body of believers operate. So the question is, well then, if he's got to fix what's broken, or put straight what was unstraight, like a broken bone, what are some of those things that he has to put straight? So I got some pictures here that are dealing with what Titus is going to be dealing with in these churches. One is you're looking at people who are greedy people. These people are in it for the money. Church work, sometimes if you miss, you can manipulate people to give you a lot of money because of a religious statement, or because of what you're saying, or how charismatic you are. So there's money to be made in manipulating people through the church. So there's people that are using the church and manipulating people to give them money, as much money as possible. So there's some greedy people. At the same time, there's some lazy people. There's some people that are just lazy. And we're not talking about the kind of laziness that we see. Oh, maybe I should rephrase that. Or what I was going to say. You know the 80-20 rule? 20% of the people do 80% of the work in a typical church. Okay, that's true, right? But we're talking about something even beyond that. So this is beyond the typical 20 doing it 80%. This is like really lazy people who are letting ministries go, and people are hurting because they're just not doing the job. Not that only 20% are doing the job. It's just these churches are not doing anything for the people. They're letting people still maintain, or they're hurting, they're hungry, they're thirsty. There's some real ministry needs, and the churches are not doing anything about it. And then there's this guy over here who's got the bottle and the tie around his head. There's just foolish people who are wasting the time. Wasting time, they're wasting resources, they're wasting their own abilities, because they're just foolish people. So what Titus is working towards and trying to fix is primarily these three major things. So he's trying to take this, fix it, and set it to its natural order of what churches ought to do. That's a big job. So what do you need for that kind of ministry to happen? You can't do it yourself. I love in the Old Testament when Moses is really trying to figure out how he's going to do what he needs to do, and his father-in-law Jethro says, you can't do it alone. You can't. You'll kill yourself doing it alone. How many times have you seen a minister or a directory leader in some way or capacity try to do it themselves, and they just wear themselves out? They do it way too long with nobody helping. And you want to say, get your team together. If I get a team, this is what I hear a lot. I say it myself too. For me to explain what has to be done, it's just faster if I do it myself. Well, that sentiment can carry you into the grave. I mean, you can get burned out so fast. So here is Paul, and he says, you're going to have to build a team. And here's what your team should look like. Here's where things get a little bit tough. Verse 6. if anyone is above reproach, a husband of one wife, and his children are believers, and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination, for an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain. Now, some of these make sense here. In my study, I don't know what happened, but I got stuck with verse 6. Because my mentor had to deal with something like this, where he had children who were deconstructed their faith. They walked away from the faith. What do we do about children? Because here's in the study that I was looking at. What does it mean to be above reproach? So above reproach means that any kind of accusation that's made against you doesn't stick. I had another friend in Arkansas, he said this: if someone throws mud at you, the temptation is to wipe it off. But a lot of times when we do that, we just make more of a mess. He said it shouldn't stick. It'll dry and fall off like nothing ever happened. Accusation, so that's what this means. Above reproach means that there should be no accusation that sticks. And there's 3 ways here that this passage deals with. So let's look at the whole part of it. In terms of a personal temptation or a personal accusation, this deals with sexual accusations, with your personal behavior, the way you may run finances, those kind of things. Those kind of things that you deal with personally, this is the kind of thing he's talking about here. No accusation would stick. Family, any kind of thing that goes with your family, no accusation should be able to stick. And your character, no accusation to stick. So here's what I found in this part right here. And his children are believers and not open to the charge of debauchery and insubordination. So looking at different kind of commentaries and different kind of commentators, there's 2 different positions on this. One is this is dealing with children who are in the home. And so like this is also seen in Timothy, when Paul says to Timothy that that children are to submit to their parents. This is similar to that, but there's some differences we have to look at. The differences here is that this looks like it's to older children, adult children. This is when I read that part, I was like, I don't want to go there, because one of the things that we want to say is, well, our kids are their own. They can make their own choices. They can walk away from the faith, and we can do everything we can. We can do everything we can, and we did everything right. How many? I've heard parents say, "I did everything right, and that could be absolutely true, and kids can still walk away. Does that apply? Does this apply to that? There's a part of those that says yes, it does. I mean, I want to look at what the text says and try to. Here's what I was doing while I was studying. I was like, I need to find an out. Where is my out? Because I don't like this. So what do we do when we don't like something that Scripture says, or we don't understand something that Scripture says? Well, so what we talked about at the very beginning of class. If we don't like what we're hearing, if we don't understand what we're hearing, we go back to the foundational truths of who God is. Who is God? What are the characteristics of God? You guys, what are some of the things that you love about the attributes of God? Maybe call them out. Grateful. What did you say? Grateful? Faithful.
Grateful.
Yeah, God is faithful. God is faithful to us. So that statement, God being faithful to us, is true if we take this as saying children, adult children who are not believers and are guilty of debauchery and insubordination. If Paul is talking about that condition, then we have to also say God is faithful. Yes.
Why do you think it's adult children?
All right. So because the word debauchery and insubordination, these are adult-related terms. The debauchery is, this is a sexual term right here. So sexual riotousness. So this is like the party lifestyle. Insubordination, this is the people that openly mock, openly speak against. So that's why when we look at this, most people will look at this and go, this sounds like it's adult children and not young children. So I was like, because I got some great friends who have children who have deconstructed their faith and they're against the church now. Does that mean that they're no longer fit for ministry?
It's actually the attributes of God. I mean, He loves us unconditionally. Us.
Yeah.
Unconditionally.
Yes. I preached my uncle's funeral. He disappeared from the family for about 10 years. They found him in a hotel room, one of those flea-ridden hotel rooms in Eagle, Colorado, in his chair from an ulcer that bled out in his stomach. Alcoholism. What am I going to say to my grandmother about her son? What am I going to say to his children who were at we were at the house talking about the funeral, what they wanted me to say. And they told me, they said, don't talk about alcoholism. Don't talk about how alcohol killed our dad. And I said, I won't. But it did. So what do we say with this? So God is good, God is faithful, and God is, what was the specific word you used, Ms. Kathy?
I said He loves us unconditionally.
He loves us unconditionally. We said this before. There's nothing that we can do that makes God love us any less, no matter what we do. God loves us profoundly. I like to say it this way: if we were to die, if I was to die today, God would not come to me and say, "I'm so glad you're here. Well done, and good faithful servant." But if you had just died tomorrow, I had something planned for you this afternoon that was going to rock your world and push you up the level of my love for you. Doesn't make sense, right? So He loves us unconditionally. Well, what do we say about this?
Nothing separates us from the love of God. Not how we live, not how we die.
Yes.
But it's not talking about that. It's talking
Right.
about ministry.
Okay, that's the key right there. So this is, was that?
Elders.
Elders.
Yeah.
This is talking about leaders. And so we'll get into into a second. Because I think what we're dealing with is not necessarily a standard of we got to have someone who has children who are wearing the smock just like their dad is, right? We're talking about something entirely different because it's not about our salvation. It's not about our relationship with God. It's about quality for leadership. Here's the thing. For an overseer, as God's steward, I think this is the key right here. As God's steward, it must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered, a drunkard, violent, or greedy for gain. I think when we're talking about above reproach, we're not talking about, let me just slide it over. We're not talking about something that's prohibitive. It's a list of prohibitions, things to say no to this. You can't, no. I think God is giving us a list of protective things that we can say yes to. Here's what I mean by that. Go back here. If you had a leader who was hot-tempered, okay, would you want to come to that person and say, hey, can you relax a little bit because you're hurting people? So you're protecting somebody by saying, don't be hot-tempered. It's a protective statement, not a prohibitive statement. Protection. Arrogant, a drunkard, violent, greedy for gain. When we say yes to things, this is a picture I thought of. If you are a runner and you want to be, how many of you are runners? Not either. I was raising my hand to give confidence to those who are like, I'll be the, I'm not a runner either. Okay. Right. Yeah, used to run, used to be. Okay, so if you're a runner,
How far back did you go?
here's the thing. What did you say?
How far back do you want to go?
How far back do you want to go? Right. If you're a runner, then you're automatically saying yes to things. Yes, I'm going to get up early in the morning. Yes, I'm going to not eat a big breakfast. Yes, I'm going to watch what I'm going to be eating. Yes, I'm going to be in this training. Yes, I'm going to be doing this. And those yeses become a protective thing. You don't see a runner with a bucket of ice cream, right? Because what is he saying? He's automatically, by saying yes to what he needs to do, he's saying it's an automatic no to what he wants to do. How many of you want to eat a gallon of ice cream? Right here. Especially if you went to the car show, W. Holdeman's cookies and cream ice cream. Or another class, they brought in Big Red. It's a Big Red ice cream, like the soda Big Red. Yeah, I went by it, it was all gone. I said, give me your can. And I just ate it out of the frozen can. It was so good. So here we have this list, and again, this is not new teaching. This is also seen in 1 Timothy 3, 1-7. Paul gives Timothy the same kind of instructions. So all of a sudden, when I think about saying, this is not God saying, talking to Titus and saying, these people are the only kind of good people that you can look for. He's saying, looking for people who are saying yes to some of these protective statements. And he also says here, he adds into this, but hospitable means lover of strangers. The Greek word here, hospitable means lover of strangers. And it matches for this other one, which is a lover of good. So, be a lover of strangers. Be a lover of what is good. Be self-controlled. Be upright. Be holy. And disciplined. These are all things that we can do. We can control those things. I love to say, because we have Christ in us, what does that mean? I can be angry and not act on my anger because I got another source, right? I can feel really mad and still be a lover of good and not be controlled by my own desires. So I'm saying yes to a protective matter. So in a sense, that I think that still holds our text true. We're not reading into the text because we cannot escape this truth that when Paul's talking about, and his children are believers, not open to doctrine and insubordination, that's what he's saying. We can't, as much as I wanted to, read into, but this, except for this. In this situation, maybe this. This is what he says. But when we change our perspective to say God is still good, and we're not talking about salvation, we're not talking about relationship, we're talking about a person's ability to serve and to be a steward. So, what does that mean for us today? My friend who has children. There's been times when someone comes to me and says, I want to serve in this ministry. And I know they're having trouble in some of these areas. And I'll say, it's not the right time for you. Focus on your family. Focus on what you need to have changed. Or not, you guys understand what I'm talking about, right? When you talk to a hurting pastor, I've never had this happen. Maybe you guys have. I've never had a pastor who's hurting say, and I wish I had just done one more hour, one more week of ministry and not been there with my kids. But I do hear pastors saying, I think I did too much at the church and my kids hurt because of that. I wish it was different. To me, this changes this list now to say, if we could help this leader. So Titus now is saying, I'm not going to choose. I'm choosing leaders who are free from this, not out of judgment, but because out of love for a dad, so he can focus on his kids and not work this hard job that Titus has in front of him. We had a person apply for an open position, and they said, I'm separated from my wife. We're working on it. It's going okay. I'm really stressed out, but I really think that if I was able to serve in this capacity, it's going to relieve some stress, and I'll be able to focus. And we were all of us that looked at this and went, and I'll say that loud here because I think you guys will all agree. How many times would you say ministry relieves stress? Right? By its very nature, ministry is about giving yourself more than you're able to, more than you have, right?
Yes.
And so if you have to take all of your energy and devote it to your kids, do it. If you have trouble with arrogancy or drunkenness or violence, take a break and work on that. That's why I think this is a list about just the relationship of an overseer. So Danny, you said something that kind of tied to this. I can imagine that later on. Let's imagine there's a man and he has some of these issues, but let's also imagine he's working on these things. And let's imagine 6 months later, he's got things are back under control. Things are good now. Can Titus go back to that man and go, come on, let's get some work done? Absolutely. It's not a once done thing, right? So here's these are my thoughts, and some of the commentaries agree with they agree with what I said. I don't see this list as a prohibitive list. I see it as a protective list. It protects people, and that's what God does. God protects his people. God protects his children. And that means saying no sometimes. That means saying no because he wants you to say yes to all these other things. I can't remember who said this, but Satan did a great job convincing Adam and Eve, that all the good things were outside the garden. And he does the same thing today, that all the good things are outside the church, or outside his mandates, his decrees. That's what the fun is. The fun is at the party. The fun's not at a Bible study. Whatever. That make sense? So we must hold firm to the trustworthy word. Here's the other part of this. So verse 8, verse 9. So this is the list, but hospitable, lover of strangers, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy. This one, he must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instructions in sound doctrine. Here's some more. And also to rebuke those who contradict it, for there are many who are insubordinate, empty talkers, deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party. So I brought this guy back from our introduction, right? This guy's back. There are people who are contradicting messages. There are people who are insubordinate, which means that they will go against what you're saying. You say something, they're going to do the exact opposite on purpose because they want to derail what you're doing. They're insubordinate. They're empty talkers. They're people who just talk about foolishness and they're just wasting their time. Deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party. This is the Judaizers who are talking about, who are still bringing up the fact that Christians should be circumcised. And go into the old Mosaic laws first. They watch what you're eating. Don't do this. Don't do that. And then you become a Christian. Paul already fought that fight. The disciples and the apostles they already had that decision made and solidified. These guys are bringing it back. They're confusing the people of Crete, which is important. But so he says this word to rebuke. To rebuke, and then he says it again, they must be silenced since they are upsetting whole families by teaching for shameful gain what they ought not teach. And then he goes back to this quote that he made, and we talked about in the introduction. One of the Cretans, a prophet of your own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true, therefore rebuke them. This word rebuke is another powerful word. Rebuke them. What do you think rebuke means? Yeah, it's just like you can't say rebuke without me acting out what it says. Rebuke. It means to violently turn away. To rebuke them. Why? Why does Paul say it twice? Almost like he's bookending the statement. Rebuke this, rebuke it. Rebuke this, rebuke it, right? He's making an emphasis because it's twice. Why? So I got a parent who's talking to her daughter, because then we have to go back to who we are as Christians. We are a blessing people. So how do we be a blessing people and rebuke? Because we're supposed to rebuke and be a blessing. A parent rebukes a child's behavior out of love, because the verse says this, that they may be sound in the faith. That's the purpose. Again, it's about protection. This is not about Bible thumping. This is not about yelling at people. This is a protective list. This is an act of protection, an act of love that God has set aside. God has set Titus and the other overseers to do, not out of vengeance or vindictiveness or judgment about who the Cretans are, but so that they can be sound in the faith. And this sound in the faith, we're going back to those first 4 verses of Paul's introduction. Those doctrinal foundational principles, those guidelines for faith and for action and for, dare I say, duty, right? These are things that we have, that they may be sound in the faith. We rebuke because we love. If we didn't love, we wouldn't rebuke. We would just let them do what they wanted to do. Last week I gave my testimony in another class. And the thing I said over and over again was this: I had wished somebody. I was an older adult when I was a Christian. I was 20. I say older adult, like 23 is an adult. they are. But as that young man, I can look back and I can reframe some of my thoughts that I remember thinking, and it's this: can somebody stop the way I'm thinking because it's hurting me? Can somebody stop the ideas that I'm having about how my life should go, because those ideas are going to hurt me? I wish somebody could stop me. I wish somebody could be there for me to say the words and say, don't go any further. Or, as God said to Moses, when Moses was complaining about why he couldn't go in the promised land, God said, Moses, shush. Shut your trap. We're not talking about this anymore. We're done. We're done. That firmness, I wish somebody had done that. Because one of the things that Satan wants us to do is take our thoughts and our ideas about the way life should go and let them run to its fullest course. To its fullest course. Because those will lead to destruction. So many times. So we rebuke. We say stop. Not because we hate the child, but because we love the child. But here's the other truth that we have here. What is it that defeats Satan's evil attacks? Is it an act of force by Titus and his mighty men of valor? He's creating an army of victorious Christians who are going to charge in with, what do we say? They're going to charge hell with a squirt gun, right? And these people are just going to run. We're going to take Crete over. Power does not defeat Satan's evil attacks. Power never does. What does?
Warrior.
Truth. Truth does. I say it this way to a lot of parents. I would say consistent. Yeah, I'm trying to remember how I put it. No, I forget. A parent who's consistent with their acts of love and interaction with their child, the things that they need with truth, not with force, but with truth from Scripture. That's what defeats Satan's attacks. If I went back to and you were part of what I said with my testimony, that's what defeated what was Satan going on in my heart. Finally, truth broke through. It wasn't an act of force, but truth broke through. Okay. So now we have verse 14. So not devoting themselves to Jewish myths and the commands of people who turn away from the truth. To the pure, all things are pure. But to the defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. But both their minds and consciousness are defiled. They profess to know God, but they deny Him by their works. They are detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work. So here's I want to bring this illustration up for you. This is a quote from John MacArthur. He says, if the mind is defiled, it cannot accurately inform the conscience, so the conscience cannot warn the person. If you were to walk into a situation, how do you know that situation is a good situation or a bad situation, a troubling situation? If I was talking to college students, I would say, how would you know if you're walking to a group of people that this was a good party or a bad party? They would say, well, my conscience will tell me. Will it? Because they have a feeling that the conscience is like a thermometer. The conscience goes, I'm going to stick the thermometer in, and it's giving you a reading about how hot the party is. Too hot? I'm out, right? So it looks at there, and a thermometer just states facts. The conscience is more like a thermostat. So you guys tell me, what's the difference between a thermometer and a thermostat? Somebody's saying it. What did you say, Albert?
I said you said what is right.
You said what is right. Now, does a thermostat have a thermometer in it? Yeah. But you get to say, this is what I consider too hot. This is what I consider too cold. You get to tell the thermostat what to do. If your heart is not attuned to what God says, so God says, I will tell you how to set your thermostat. I'll tell you what your thermostat saying should be. But we tend to, because our minds are defiled, we cannot accurately inform the conscience, we want to say, no, even now, there are times I'm like, yeah, but I could go here. And I'm setting my thermostat just a little bit higher, so it goes off a little bit later than it should, to where it says, okay, so you can get me out of here, right? So we oftentimes think about the conscience, and this is what he talks about the conscience. Their consciousnesses are defiled. Both their mind and their consciousnesses are defiled because they are the ones who are setting their the thermostat, their consciousness, not God. God sets these things. And what is God setting for these things? What's God setting for this thermostat? I don't know. Could it be that whole list of things we just covered? That could be part of what this thermostat's all about. Let me end with this. He says, but as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. That's the beginning. It's kind of a segue statement that goes into a whole other list of things we'll talk about next week. But it ends, I like to end this way because Paul is saying, no matter what are you doing? This. Teach what accords with sound doctrine. Somebody comes to you and says, hey, I think you're speaking too harshly with these people. Or, hey, I think you should talk more about this. Or, hey, you should do this. Hey, you should go to that town. Because that town is really messed up. Titus goes, appreciate that, and I'll probably get to that. But my job right here, my goal here, teach what accords with sound. And that brings us into the next part, which is the end of these slides. I think I want to, let me just go ahead and just put this back up here, because I think that's the goal of this whole discussion today, is that we do everything so that our leaders on down to children to church members understand the sound, they need to be sound in the faith. Notice it didn't say sound in their doctrine, that's really super important, but sound in their faith. Dr. Ross, I'll say this, Dr. Ross he says it this way: every child has a tube that's stuck in their heart, and that tube is just sucking anything in, and that tube is just looking for something. Families, dads, moms, they take that tube and they say, put it right here, and put it to their heart, and then it just sucks out from what the parents have. So the faith that our leaders have, our parents have, gets sucked down into their kids. Disconnect that pipe, and it's going to suck and connect to who knows what. Who knows what. Sound in the faith. God bless you guys.